În Turcia a avut loc prima rundă de negocieri între miniștrii de externe din Ucraina și Rusia de când a început războiul. Simplul fapt că s-a putut organiza întâlnirea dintre Kuleba și Lavrov este un succes diplomatic pentru turci. De ce este atât de importantă poziția Turciei, stat aliat NATO care a condamnat deja agresiunea începută de ruși împotriva ucrainienilor în rezolvarea acestui conflict? Fostul diplomat, Mehmet Ogutcu, ne explică toate motivele. Sunt Cristina Cileacu. Începe Pașaport diplomatic. Mehmet Ogutcu, former Turkish diplomat, welcome to Diplomatic Passport.
My pleasure.
Mehmet, Turkey will host the first meeting between the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs, and this is a diplomatic success, but for Turkey for the moment. How do you see the chances of this meeting having some conclusion that will be, let's say, the first step to end the war in Ukraine now?
Well, I think it's going to be very ambitious to say that this meeting will result in ending the crisis in Ukraine. However, it demonstrates very vividly that Turkey has a very productive relationship with both Kiev and Moscow. They wouldn't have trusted to have such a meeting anywhere else in the West. I think it's Turkey's value as a lifeline to both Ukraine and Russia in this crisis. Because Erdogan and Çavuşoğlu, of course, foreign minister, have a very practical and pragmatic working relationship with Zelensky, with Putin, as well as between the foreign ministers, and also their brain trust. And it's economic, political, energy, intelligence, tourism, whatever you name it, there are very strong ties. So it's quite logical that they accepted the Turkish invitation to come to Antalya and talk. In terms of the results that you asked me about, I think both sides will repeat the well-known statements. However, it's important that face-to-face meetings held not in public fora, because they will explain whatever they believe in addressing the public. I don't think that they will deviate here from their position. However, if they are going to have one-to-one meeting in a closed room behind the scene, this is where the real discussion will start. Because we are in a situation right now, humanitarian crisis is grave in Ukraine. You know, people are estimating that at least 5 million Ukrainians will be forced to leave the country. And in addition to that, of course, the energy crisis that is brewing with the announcement from Biden that the United States will ban all oil, gas, and coal imports from Russia is a very serious one. It's not going to affect the US so much, but if the EU will go that way, which I understand coordinated with Washington, this might have two consequences. One, a boomerang effect, which will hurt the Western, especially the European consumers, because of the price spike. But also it might have a good effect in terms of speeding up the green energy revolution. Less dependence on Russia and focusing on other producers like Venezuela, which has the world's largest oil reserves, but under sanctions for so many years. With Iran, where we are trying to revive 2015 nuclear deal. And Iran might also release considerable amount of oil and gas to the international market. So we are in a very critical point, geopolitical speaking, as well as economic and energy play. And the meeting in Antalya, of course, as you mentioned, coming back to that point, may not bring a significant breakthrough. However, it's a first step. If they start talking, because at some point they need to start to talk, and that's where it starts. And I hope that this might be perhaps the beginning of the Antalya process, where in a phased manner, serious discussions and the deals. I think we are in a stage where new deals have to be made. Because Russia occupied Ukraine, that's clear. One by one, they are trying to capture all the cities, creating huge humanitarian disasters. But in terms of realpolitik, what will be the end result? This will be determined through such meetings as taking place in Antalya.
Okay, let's get back to Turkey a bit, because of course Turkey has the second biggest army inside NATO. Also, Turkey positioned itself very clear on the Ukrainian side in this open conflict. Turkey stands with its allies. In the same time, Turkey sold weapons to both Ukraine and Russia. Also, Turkey controls the straits in the Black Sea, where Russia has a big amount of warship vessels. How can we simplify this relationship between Turkey and Russia and Ukraine for the public to understand what is the role of Turkey in, let's say, trying to de-escalate this conflict?
Well, I think it's very clear what Turkish position is. Simply, Turkey has vital ties with Russia, most importantly, because Turkish dependency on oil and gas imports heavily favoring Russia, and also the same way grain import. 80% of Turkish grain comes from Ukraine and Russia. So Russia is building nuclear power plant in Mersin Akkuyu, which will be operational from 2023. And all this put together is quite difficult for Turkey to cut off its relations with Russia. Also, whatever happens between West and Russia, there is always a need for intermediary. Turkey might be the lifeline for diplomacy and dialogue as well. You need a country where both sides can trust, and the West can trust as well. Therefore, Turkey was very careful in terms of condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Turkey, as you said, provided quite sophisticated drones to Ukrainians, which they used in bombing Russian military convoys and some of the facilities. Putin wasn't happy about that. Turkey also, at the request of Ukraine, Zelensky personally called Erdogan to close the straits to Russian warships. In accordance with the Montreux Convention of 1936, Turkey has the right to close the straits in times of war, even though Turkey is not a belligerent party. Mm-hmm. This has two advantages for Turkey as well. One is the Black Sea Navy of Russia will not be able to pass through the straits to go to Syria. As you know, there's a big Russian naval base there in Syria, Taurus. This way, Russian involvement in Syria will be somehow moderated. That's in the interest of Turkey. Secondly, of course, there is the question of some of the warships already outside Black Sea could enter back to Black Sea, and this will not be possible. I don't think that this is going to have a huge implication for Russia, because it already has significant presence, naval presence in Black Sea. But Russia will be noting this, I'm sure, in the matter of days. And Turkey, I think, could be also conduit for some sort of creative trading with Russia. I don't think that Turkey can cut off, disrupt the trade, investment, and other flows right away, as EU is doing. Because EU nations, in solidarity with one another, can cope with them collectively, whereas Turkey is alone. Who is going to compensate? But if you look at the big geopolitical picture, because I think this conflict will be much smaller than the conflict that US might have with China in the years and decades to come. The real struggle is between China and the United States, not US and Russia. Therefore, as soon as this crisis is over, I think we'll turn our attention to China, what Chinese attitude will be. And if it's going to be a new Cold War, a new Iron Wall falling, putting Russia, China, Iran, and others on the other side of the wall, then Turkish position will be critical, as it was during the Cold War, after the Second World War. And therefore, whether Turkey will be siding with the West, EU and Washington, or Turkey will be on the other camp, or in between. So these are the critical questions. And Turkish relations with EU and Washington are at the lowest ebb. They don't trust each other. So this is the opportunity for the West, whether they want Turkey to be in or out. And there is a price to pay for this, both from Turkey as well as from the West. And I believe that in such critical juncture in history, you know, like Ukrainian application for full membership in EU, Turkey has been an accession country for more than half a century.
Yeah.
And perhaps this might be the time to tell whether you belong to us, you are with us, or outside. Then Turkish decision will be shaped by this as well. The same goes with dialogue with Biden, because Biden stopped talking to Erdogan, and therefore relations are only, you know, transactional right now. So there is a need. If the world is changing, we are going to have a different geopolitical setting, different economic blocks, different supply, energy supply infrastructure. Then it has to be decided by Ankara, Washington, and Brussels where Turkey will be sitting. That's very critical.
In NATO eastern flank, most of the population has this fear of the war developing beyond the border of Ukraine into our own countries. Does this fear exist at the level of the Turkish population as well?
I don't think that we have such a fear in Turkey. And I believe that also Putin would be wise enough not to spread the war beyond Ukraine to Eastern and Central European countries. There will be implications, of course, like refugees, like the energy shortages and what you have, and the disruption in trade. But Putin spreading the war beyond Ukraine, I think will be beyond its power. They can control Ukraine somehow, because it's a former Soviet republic. But Article 5 of NATO, of course, it hasn't been tested for long years. Mm-hmm. Whether it will be activated or not. I believe that it will be activated. US and European Union countries within NATO are determined to uphold NATO. Otherwise, you have a totally different ballgame. If you give an inch in terms of NATO assurance, security assurance, one for all and all for one, and then that means NATO is dead. And I think Putin is wise enough to know what the consequences will be. However, he's very smart. He upped the game by putting the high alert on nuclear weapons, which I don't think he intends to use, if he is rational. But using it upfront prevented NATO countries to make any military support to Ukraine, except allowing sales of military equipment, planes, and whatever to Ukraine on credit. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that Putin will be moving. And in Turkey, there is no, of course, Turks and Russians fought throughout the history 13 times. And each of them, of course, the Russians were the victorious power. They came very close to Istanbul. You remember during the Balkan Wars. And also after the Second World War, Stalin wanted to have parts of eastern Turkey and control over the straits, Turkish straits. Mm-hmm. We never forget that. We never forget also what happened in 2015 when Russian Su-24s violated Turkish airspace
and it was shot down, yeah.
F-16 fighters shot them down. That was the first shooting of a Russian warplane in NATO history after the Second World War. So they know how serious Turkey is in defending its own country. And also given that Turkey is providing a lifeline and also platform for dialogue, partnership between Ukraine and Russia, and also energy, food, tourism, military dependence on both sides, I think Russians will not be considered to be wise or smart if they threaten Turkey at such a critical time. Also, we have a thinking in Turkey about the bear, being Russia, mm-hmm. never go into bed with bear. So always have certain distance when you deal with your. We are bound by geography, and now they are after the annexation of Crimea and Abkhazia, and then you have South Ossetia. They are very close neighbors of Turkey, so you have to coexist with your neighbor. Therefore, no matter whether you like them or not, there is an imperative to coexist and work together in the same geography.
Let's get back to energy, because we see the prices of energy are skyrocketing, literally. Europe becomes more dependent on US resources. The news today, the day we record this interview, is that both Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates denied a phone call of President Biden. How shall we understand all these events? Shall we link them as well with the negotiation with the Iranian nuclear deal of United States?
Well, as I said, this energy supply infrastructure in Europe, not so much in the United States, will have to change if we take these sanctions seriously. This is not a passing event. You have sanctions for 3 months, then you lift them as things go well. I think there is a very strong political will to reduce dependence of the European Union on Russia. Right now, 40% of EU natural gas comes from Russia and 25% of oil. Therefore, if this is going to be diverted, we need new sources of energy. One is, as the US is trying to do, mobilize countries like Venezuela and Iran. With Venezuela, the country under sanctions, political and economic, for decades almost, but it has the world's largest oil reserves. If you channel a couple of $1 billion today to Venezuela, in a few years you might have massive production that can easily fill the gap left by Russian exports, because Russia is the third largest producer in the world, but almost 7 to 8% of the world's oil production and oil products. So it can easily be covered if Venezuela and Iran, as you know, 2015 nuclear deal now being revived, I am sure that we are very close to a deal in Vienna, then I think they can easily cover what Russia will be leaving behind. But this requires huge diplomatic skill, because neither Iran nor Venezuela would like to be seen as stabbing Russia in the back. Then China. Never forget China. China is the #1 oil importer in the world. And China is in a strategic partnership or marriage of convenience with Russia. Again, the question is whether Russia will be willing to put at risk its relations with the West, because the European Union and the United States are the biggest market for Chinese products and services. At the expense of keeping in touch and also friendly to Putin, whether Xi Jinping will be risking its own political, economic and energy interests around the world. Because there is a risk that if it works with Russia closely, ignoring all the sanctions, and whether China will be subjected to sanctions as well. China is the largest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power parity, and also if you combine Chinese strength with Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, where the ruling elites and the business community are ethnic Chinese. Therefore, the world economy will be contracted significantly. Huge disruption to the West. I think one question here we have to answer also that, of course, nobody can condone Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's a serious violation of territorial integrity, then sovereignty and national unity. These are the basic international concepts of the law, rule of law. If you allow this to happen, the same things could be replicated elsewhere in the world. If China tomorrow tries to annex Taiwan, then what are you going to do on the basis of what the Russians did? Therefore, I think the common interest is to uphold the international law wherever it applies. And it will be a lawless international community if Russia gets away with what it wants. So China will be perhaps taking side with the West unwillingly or discreetly, because it depends heavily on energy import as well. The price spikes will affect China considerably, because more than half of Chinese energy depends on import. So for this economy to be fueled, it has to import heavily, not only from Russia, but also from Saudi Arabia, from Latin America, from Africa, Southeast Asia, everywhere. So here we need smart leaders. Putin knows what he is doing. I wouldn't call him smart, but he knows what he is doing. And I hope Biden and EU leaders, and Chinese leaders, Turkish leaders, Iranian leaders, Venezuelan leaders will also know what they will be doing. So it has the time to be smart in many ways, so that the decisions by leaders will not adversely affect people in the street, consumers.
Mehmet Ogutcu, former Turkish diplomat, thank you so much for this interview.
Pleasure talking to you, Cristina.
Atât pentru astăzi, dar rămânem în continuare online pe pagina de Facebook a emisiunii și pe contul nostru de Twitter. Revenim cu subiecte noi din lumea diplomației și a politicii externe, vinerea viitoare de la 11:30 și în reluare sâmbătă de la 22:30. La revedere!